and I had a record called What It Was Football.
Sure.
And Ed Sullivan wanted to sign me up for, I think it was 18 shots.
He made an entire planet laugh, and almost nobody around him knew he was quietly falling apart. That is the strange, aching truth sitting underneath one of the most devastating deaths in modern entertainment history, and for years the public was only allowed to know half of it. The other half stayed locked inside hospital records, private journals, and the memories of the people who loved him most. It has taken over a decade, and the deliberate, careful courage of his own children, to finally pull that second half into the light. Robin Williams was, by almost every account, the most relentlessly alive performer of his generation. Born in Chicago in 1951 and raised largely in Marin County, California, he built a career on sheer improvisational speed, a mind that seemed to fire faster than anyone could follow. From his breakout as the alien Mork on Happy Days and its spin-off Mork and Mindy, to unforgettable film work in Good Will Hunting, Dead Poets Society, Mrs. Doubtfire and Aladdin, Williams became something rarer than a movie star. He became a kind of emotional shorthand for joy itself. Audiences didn't just watch him. They trusted him, the same way viewers trusted Andy Taylor decades earlier in a different kind of small town. Robin Williams felt like the friend everyone wished they had, the one who could turn a bad day around in 90 seconds flat. And that is precisely what made August 11, 2014, so difficult for the public to process. When news broke that Williams had died at his home in Paradise Cay, California, at the age of 63, the immediate explanation offered to the world was severe depression. It was true, but it was also incomplete, and in that gap between the official statement and the fuller story, rumors rushed in almost instantly. Tabloids speculated about a career in decline. Some outlets suggested financial strain following a costly divorce. Others floated theories about a relapse into substance abuse, pointing to his well-documented decades-earlier struggles with cocaine and alcohol. For a man who had spent his entire adult life performing vulnerability for laughs, the final chapter of his story was, ironically, being written by people who had never actually spoken to him. What almost nobody knew at the time was that Robin Williams was already fighting a battle inside his own brain that even his doctors had misread. In the months before his death, he had been misdiagnosed with Parkinson's disease, a diagnosis that explained some of his symptoms but not nearly all of them. He was experiencing paranoia, memory lapses, anxiety attacks, and a creeping sense that his own mind was betraying him in ways he couldn't name. Those closest to him watched a famously sharp, quick performer slowly lose confidence in his own instincts, and at the time, almost no one outside his inner circle understood why. The truth only became clear after an autopsy. Doctors discovered that Williams had been suffering from diffuse Lewy body dementia, a devastating and often misdiagnosed neurological disease that can produce hallucinations, cognitive decline, and severe anxiety long before more familiar symptoms appear. It is considered one of the most difficult conditions in neurology to diagnose accurately while a patient is still alive. His widow, Susan Schneider Williams, later wrote about this experience directly in the medical journal Neurology, in an essay that described watching her husband's mind unravel in real time, without either of them fully understanding what disease was actually doing it. She described the illness, in her own words, as something that felt less like an ordinary decline and more like a kind of internal siege. Her essay became one of the most cited pieces of writing on Lewy body dementia in the years that followed, cited by neurologists trying to help other families recognize warning signs earlier. But Susan wasn't the only person carrying that story. Robin Williams had 3 children from 2 marriages, Zachary, known as Zach, from his first marriage to Valerie Velarde, and Zelda and Cody, from his second marriage to Marcia Garces. For years after their father's death, his children largely stayed out of the public conversation about what had really happened, choosing grief over explanation. That silence, understandably, only fed public speculation further. When someone as beloved as Robin Williams dies without a full explanation, the internet tends to fill in the blanks itself, and often not kindly. It was Zach Williams who eventually began speaking more openly, years after his father's death, in a series of interviews with outlets including People magazine and Today. He described watching his father's mental state shift in ways that felt frightening and disorienting for the entire family, and he confirmed what many had only suspected, that his father's death was not simply the result of untreated sadness or a sudden emotional collapse, but the culmination of a misunderstood physical disease compounding decades of very real anxiety about mental health, something Robin Williams had quietly struggled with even during his most successful years. Zach has spoken about growing up watching a father who could light up an entire room and then retreat into private moments of real fear, a duality that fans who only saw the public performance could never have guessed. In confirming these details publicly, years after the fact, the Williams children weren't sensationalizing their father's death. In many ways, they were doing the opposite. They were correcting a narrative that had, for a decade, painted their father either as a tragic figure who simply gave up, or worse, someone whose death was tied to scandal and hidden vice. The reality Zach Williams described was far more human and far more medical, a man whose brain was failing him in ways science was only beginning to understand, layered on top of a lifetime of very real, well-documented mental health challenges that he had spoken about publicly for years, including his open acknowledgement of past substance abuse and periods of depression during interviews throughout the 1980s and 2000s. Zach Williams eventually turned that painful clarity into purpose. He became a mental health advocate, co-founding a company focused on emotional wellness and speaking at length about the importance of accurate diagnosis, generational mental health patterns, and the danger of public figures hiding real struggles behind a performance of constant strength. In interviews, he has described his father's story as a cautionary tale about how even the people who make us laugh the hardest can be carrying weight nobody else can see, and how medicine sometimes fails even the most famous, most resourced patients in the country. What makes this story land so differently from a typical Hollywood rumor is the tone in which it was eventually confirmed. There was no tell-all designed to shock. There was no dramatic press conference. Instead, there was a slow, careful unspooling of the truth through medical journals, measured interviews, and years of quiet advocacy. Work by people who genuinely loved him and wanted the record corrected, not sensationalized. That distinction matters. Robin Williams spent his life being profoundly, almost uncomfortably honest on stage, riffing about his own addiction, his own fears, his own therapy sessions, often turning his darkest material into some of his most celebrated comedy. And yet the final and most important truth of his life only reached the public because his children were willing to revisit their own grief in public, on the record, years after most people assumed the story was already finished. It says something larger about fame itself, the same something that echoes through so many stories like this one. The public rarely gets access to the full picture while someone is alive to protect it. Even a man whose entire persona was built on radical, screaming honesty still had a private battle that outpaced anyone's understanding, including his own. His widow's essay in neurology remains one of the most important pieces of writing connecting the medical world to the entertainment world, a reminder that celebrity and vulnerability to disease are not mutually exclusive, no matter how untouchable someone appears on a screen. 10 years on, the rumors that once surrounded Robin Williams' death have largely been replaced by something closer to understanding. Not every mystery gets resolved this cleanly. Not every family chooses to speak. But in this case, the people who knew him best decided that protecting his memory meant telling the truth, even the uncomfortable, medically complicated parts of it, rather than letting speculation calcify into myth. What emerges is not a scandal at all, but something sadder and more human, a brilliant man whose mind failed him in a way medicine still struggles to catch in time, surrounded by people who loved him enough to eventually say so publicly on his behalf. So when the old clips resurface, the Mrs. Doubtfire scenes, the Dead Poet Society speeches, the manic, dazzling energy of Mork from Ork, it's worth remembering that behind the laughter there was a war happening that almost no one could see. His children didn't confirm a rumor about betrayal or hidden vice. They confirmed something far more painful and far more real, that even the man who made the whole world laugh was fighting a battle his own doctors couldn't fully name until it was too late, and that his family's willingness to finally say so, out loud, years after burying him, may be the most honest performance connected to his legacy yet.